It was a big story, right? Just a lot of chaos.
The JonBenét Ramsey murder.
They made up their mind on day one that I killed my daughter.
3 decades on,
You can't comprehend that anybody would be that evil.
it's still unsolved.
Law enforcement never opened that door.
But now detectives are doing what they should have done in the first place.
There was no doubt in your mind that a stun gun was used.
I was about as sure as I could be.
Following the evidence.
You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes. This is what we call a clue.
Find the killer, take that burden off of my father.
Yes, it's been a long time in coming.
There's a simple rule every police detective learns early in their career: follow the evidence. It's a principle, though, that appears to have been forgotten when child beauty queen JonBenét Ramsey was found strangled to death in the basement of her family home. Her murder, 27 years ago, remains unsolved. A substantial reason for that is that local police investigating the crime were convinced JonBenét's parents were the perpetrators. Other suspects, along with crucial evidence, were ignored. But now, a breakthrough, and finally, a genuine opportunity for this mystery to be cracked. It's below freezing in Denver, Colorado, but 80-year-old John Ramsey has a spring in his step. For the first time in 27 years, he feels hope that his daughter's killer might finally be brought to justice with a brand new investigation. The gruesome murder of 6-year-old beauty queen JonBenét Ramsey is one of the world's most notorious unsolved crimes. But the terrible truth is, John knows if local police hadn't bungled the case, the killer could have been found long ago.
Had the police really been on it with experienced people, this was not a hard case to solve. Shouldn't have been a hard case to solve. And that's what should have happened. And it didn't, because they didn't have experienced people.
Well, here we are, John, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation.
Yes, it's been a long time in coming.
John Ramsey is finally getting what he's always wanted. At last, a crack team of cold case investigators has been tasked with taking a proper look at all the evidence, which Boulder police never did. They only ever had eyes on the Ramsey family.
You know, they made up their mind on day one. And the conclusion was that I killed my daughter.
Do you have more hope now, this year, than you have had in a long time?
You know, this is something we've been trying to get accomplished almost from day one. Get help from the outside.
After nearly 3 decades of inaction, the Cold Case Review is the biggest turning point in the mystery of what happened to JonBenét Ramsey. Tonight, we reveal what the team is scrutinising, the staggering list of evidence that was missed or blatantly overlooked, the secret DNA report that cleared the family 2 weeks after the murder.
What we know is that none of that DNA matched
her
anybody
family.
in the family.
The forensic expert who police ignored,
I was about as sure as I could be.
and the sexual assault of another young girl just months later.
You have to ask yourself, right, like, could this be the same person?
It was Boxing Day morning, 1996, in the small but affluent town of Boulder, Colorado, nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. John and Patsy Ramsey awoke to find JonBenét missing. The first thing they found was a ransom note.
What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Kathy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please.
Police arrived and searched the home, finding no trace of the little girl. But then, on a second hunt around, John Ramsey discovered his daughter behind a basement door no one had bothered to open. She'd been sexually assaulted and strangled to death.
I quickly pulled the tape off her mouth and her hands were bound. And I couldn't get the knot untied. It was really tightly tied. She had been strangled with a garrote. It was so deeply embedded in her skin that I didn't see it.
It's very difficult to imagine a more distressing, gruesome scene.
It just, you can't comprehend that anybody would be that evil.
But in Boulder, police were more accustomed to writing traffic fines than solving murders, and that lack of experience would underscore the investigation from day one. Police declared the Ramsey family prime suspects, and even today, almost everyone thinks they got away with murder.
There's nothing more dangerous than a police department that's made up its mind, because they are totally excluding anything that conflicts with that conclusion.
Just days after JonBenét's murder, Detective John San Agustin received a call from the Boulder Police who needed his expertise. He witnessed the police case unravel from the moment he arrived.
What was that like?
Boulder was just, it was crazy. I mean, it was just a lot of chaos. I mean, literally, you had news reporters from all around the world just kind of migrating to Boulder because it was a big story, right? A 6-year-old little girl, you know, who's been murdered, and, you know, nobody knows who did it, but the focus was obviously on the family. And so now you come back to this, you know, the setting right now is actually quite similar to December of '96. There was a little
Instantly, this experienced detective knew it was so obvious that someone had broken into the home, a theory the local cops didn't want to hear about.
Well, there was a lot of evidence that supported that there was an intruder.
Was that intruder theory properly investigated?
I don't even think that it even was something that they entertained.
Considered?
No. What I can tell you with pretty good certainty was that there were at least 2,500 leads in the early part of the investigation that literally were never followed up on.
Why?
Because the tunnel vision existed from the moment the murder happened. The focus was on John and Patsy Ramsey.
These crime scene photos taken by Boulder Police have been pored over by the cold case review team now investigating the murder.
Law enforcement never opened that door.
For John, these images help piece together the amateur oversights made and evidence that was completely ignored. The first hints that an intruder was in the home are found in photos of the Ramseys' basement.
Yeah, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes, right, to know that this is what we call a clue, right? You got an open window, you got a scuff mark on the wall, you have a suitcase. On the suitcase is some broken glass. You can actually see some broken glass on the suitcase. So
John believes this photo clearly shows how the intruder left the house.
But more importantly, what was inside of this suitcase, Amelia, were fibers that matched what JonBenét was wearing when her body was found by her dad, which means that at some point, potentially, her body might have been placed inside of that suitcase.
So what does this tell you? Is it particularly well planned? Is it?
No, this murder was extremely disorganized.
Not only did the Boulder team ignore all this clear evidence, John would soon learn they deliberately kept a major scientific breakthrough secret. DNA evidence found on JonBenét's clothing, including her blood-stained underwear and from her fingernail clippings, ruled out the entire Ramsey family, but it did find a stranger's DNA.
The significance of this is that they knew 2.5 weeks after the murder of this little girl that John Andrew Ramsey, Melinda Ramsey, John B. Ramsey, Patricia Ramsey, Burke Ramsey, Jeff Ramsey would be excluded as a source of the DNA analyzed on those exhibits.
So they knew from that point on they were looking for an intruder, foreign DNA.
Again, right, this is one piece of the puzzle. But what is significant about this is that this is science telling you that what is under this little girl's fingernails and on her underwear, right? What we know is that none of that DNA matched anybody in the family. Matched nobody in the family, but yet here we are 27 years later, and the vast majority of people who look into this case think, well, the family had something to do with it.
But this was just the beginning of an epic police failure, ignoring the facts and the experts in their determination to pin the murder on JonBenét's family.
So is it fair to say then that this could have been or should have been a really critical piece of evidence for Boulder Police?
For more than 20 years as a county coroner in Colorado, Dr. Michael Dobison saw evil at work, confronted by death and devastation on a daily basis. But there's one case he couldn't close that still haunts him to this day. In 1997, Dr. Dobison was asked by a local detective to take a look at a specific and extremely graphic element of the JonBenét Ramsey murder mystery.
When you first saw the marks on JonBenét Ramsey's skin, what did you think?
First thing I really thought of were stun gun injuries.
When 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey was found strangled to death in the basement of the family's Colorado home in 1996, she had tiny round marks on her skin.
There were 2 injuries on JonBenét. One was on the right cheek and the other was on the left back. And they were paired injuries. And both of the injuries, the ones on her neck and on her back, were the same distance apart, and they had the same general configuration.
And what did that tell you?
That was one of the things that led me to think that this really was due to a stun gun.
How common were stun guns back in the 1990s?
Back then, it was a fairly new technology, and we really hadn't seen much in the way of stun gun injuries, particularly in the field of forensic pathology.
But Dr. Dobison knew exactly what he was looking at, because 3 years before JonBenét's murder, the forensic pathologist worked on a case where the victim had similar skin markings. Baffled by the distinctive round dots, he carried out the first experiment of its kind in the United States to prove what caused them.
We had to use anesthetized pigs in order to induce the kind of injury that we saw on the murder victim.
So the pig is anaesthetised, and then what did you do? Test the stun gun in different parts?
We did. So the next slide shows the series of experiments that we did. We did various applications of the stun gun to the animal. You can see that some of the injuries marked 2 are very similar to the ones seen on JonBenét Ramsey.
So there was no doubt in your mind that a stun gun was used in the Ramsey murder?
I was about as sure as I could be.
Dr. Dobison knew this could be a critical piece of the puzzle for Boulder Police. While it may not have led them directly to the killer, it pointed to the nature of the crime.
Were you surprised that Boulder Police didn't follow up, given your expertise, given this experiment?
I was, because The use of a stun gun really suggests someone who was trying to incapacitate someone else. And that certainly argued against the idea that someone in the family had to incapacitate JonBenét at the time of her murder.
On the edge, you see these probes, and this is essentially a pain compliance type of tool, right? We use it, we turn it on, it lights up, and then by striking it, it allows that ability to, right, provide some level of pain.
To this day, former Detective John San Agustin is astounded that local police rejected Dr. Dobeson's expertise and compelling experiment.
And think about it as a parent. How does this all make sense in the sequence of events?
The point is, it makes no sense for a parent to use an aggressive weapon to force a 6-year-old child to comply.
You have children. You wanted your little girl, your little boy to go somewhere in the middle of the night. You simply pick them up
and carry them.
And you carry them down.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing about these types of investigations. You talk to a forensic pathologist who says, that's a stun gun, you better listen, right? Because that's what they do. They look at cause, they look at manner, they look at injuries, they look at patterns, they look at all these things. And when they tell you this is caused by a stun gun, you better listen.
Imagining the pain and terror that weapon would have inflicted on little JonBenét is still incredibly difficult for her family to contemplate. JonBenét's brother, John Andrew, was 20 when his sister was killed. All these years on, he's still infuriated by Boulder Police's refusal to consider Dr. Dobeson's expert evidence, which may have changed the trajectory of their investigation.
The stun gun, to me, would not identify the killer, right? It would help in your defense,
Right.
but it wouldn't identify the killer. We know a stun gun was used, right? The pictures indicate that. When she went to bed that night, those marks were not there. When she was found the next day, those burn marks were there. It's clear as day.
And clearly quite a significant tool in the murderer's
It's a specialized
MO.
weapon,
Yep.
very unique.
Dr. Michael Dobeson used to be part of Colorado's cold case review team, and so he knows his historical report will attract their attention as they siphon through all the evidence in the JonBenét Ramsey case.
How important is bringing in fresh eyes on a case like this?
No, I think it's very important, and I think presenting it to someone else always has the advantage of someone looking outside the box.
Do you believe that this cold case review could hold hope for the family?
I think so. I think it's maybe one of the last chances, really, to solve this case.
But perhaps the most startling lead police ignored happened 9 months after the child beauty queen's murder. Another young girl was attacked in her bed just blocks from the Ramsey home.
What was your reaction when you read about that? I mean, did you
Well,
think...
it was like, this needs to be looked at. This is a connection. This is too similar to our case.
Our next contestant is JonBenét Ramsey.
The tragic murder of child beauty queen JonBenét Ramsey remains one of the most infamous unsolved cases in the world. But 9 months after it happened and a few kilometres away, a very similar crime went virtually unnoticed. Another little girl in Boulder, Colorado, was attacked in her bed. Former detective John San Agustin says the similarities were striking.
Mom and daughter were the only ones home. Mom retires, goes to sleep in her room, daughter is in her room, and while daughter is asleep, a perpetrator entered the home, sexually assaulted her. Mom is awoken And so she actually encounters the individual. He actually passes by her and jumps off a second-story patio or deck and was able to escape. Well, when you look at that case and you look at some of the things that happened with JonBenét, you have to ask yourself, right, like, could this be the same person?
This is the house where the attack happened, in the same affluent part of Boulder. It only took me about 5 minutes to drive here from the Ramsey home, which is just over that way. Now, if there's no connection between these two crimes, then it's a remarkable coincidence. You don't have to be in law enforcement to hear the story of the similar attack so soon afterwards and think, oh, that would be worth checking out.
You always
They could be linked.
Very much so.
So there was no attempt to investigate a link between the cases, compare them, as you say, compare DNA.
I'm not aware of it.
No one was ever charged with the sexual assault, and the victim and her family eventually moved away from Boulder. JonBenét's father, John, and brother, John Andrew, were stunned when they heard what had happened in the same neighbourhood, in what became known as Amy's case.
The circumstances were very similar. I believe that creature came into our home when we were gone. They had gone out, come back, set the burglar alarm, and gone to bed. So obviously he was in the house when they got home. And that's what I believe happened in our case.
Yeah, I mean, this is Boulder, Colorado, and, the mid to late 90s. I mean, these two crimes are just complete and total outliers of what would have occurred in this city otherwise, right?
But totally similar.
Yeah, but totally similar.
And yet never investigated as connected.
No.
And this is the truly eerie part. Amy and JonBenét Ramsey knew each other. They went to the same dance school. They both performed in local shows in the months before their attacks. Yet, incredibly, Boulder police repeatedly refused to investigate any possible link between the two cases.
They blew it off. Though they were the attack, the same detectives investigated that case as investigated ours.
I mean, it was just sheer buffoonery. The Boulder police threw away the bed sheets where she was assaulted on, so there was no ability to go back and do DNA testing. I mean, they, similar to us, just absolutely bungled this investigation.
In 2008, 12 years after the murder of little JonBenét, the Ramsey family was finally cleared as suspects. But JonBenét's mother, Patsy, had already passed away. She died of cancer in 2006. With no killer behind bars, widespread suspicion surrounding the family's involvement persists to this day.
There's still a large portion of the world that still thinks the family had something to do with it. And it's only because of why? It's because of the narrative that has been pushed for so many years that it had to be somebody in the family. Not based on evidence, based on what they believe, because their theory was that from the very beginning.
Boulder police declined to talk to 60 Minutes, but the force is making long overdue changes. Late last year, the new police chief retired or demoted the detectives involved in the JonBenét investigation, and finally invited the Colorado cold case team to investigate, putting an end to 27 years of incompetence.
Do you feel like now, age 80, you have grieved for JonBenét?
Well, I think so. I mean, it still surfaces. I'll see a little girl hanging onto her dad's hand walking down the street, and it tugs at my heart. But I do believe that JonBenét's in heaven. I will see her again in some way. My little brain can't comprehend how that will be, but I have faith in that. And she's safe.
If JonBenét was alive today, she'd be 33. For the Ramsey family, her death has meant a lifetime of anguish and suffering that's taken its toll. John Andrew will soon take over from his elderly father in the family's battle for justice. And he vows not to give up until the killer is behind bars.
The facts are that the players in this case are still alive today, right? People with institutional knowledge are still here. Witnesses are still here. And the killer is likely still alive, right? He hasn't aged out, right? So if you look at those facts, the opportunity presents itself that we can, everything's lining up just right, that we can finally find this killer.
Hello, I'm Amelia Adams. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for our brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minute segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.